Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Zysol is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Zysol keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all, take Zysol. At night.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places. Between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Elaine Park is still a missing person, and her case is still open with the Glendale Police Department. If you have any information about her whereabouts, please contact them on 818-548-3135 and mention Elaine's case number, 171512.
I just want to know where Elaine is, if she's still alive, if she's not with us anymore, where is she? Where is she, buried? Is she adopted? Is she overdosed? I don't know. This is about a daughter, a sister, she's all we have. My son and me, she's all we have.
This is Susan Park, talking about her daughter, Elaine. On the morning of January 28, 2017, Elaine was caught on CCTV leaving her ex-boyfriend Divine Compere's guest house in Calabasas, a neighbourhood in the San Fernando Valley. The footage shows her walking past a hedge near the driveway, through the property's gates, and toward her car. But before she reaches it, at exactly 6:05 a.m., the footage abruptly cuts off. A few days later, her car was found abandoned on the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, about 10 miles from Divine's house, and in the opposite direction of her own house. The car had half a tank of gas, the doors were unlocked, the keys were still in the ignition, and the battery was dead. Inside, stacked neatly, were all of Elaine's belongings: her phone, her purse, cash, and her bank card. But Elaine was nowhere to be found. At the time, Elaine was 20 years old. She had 2 cats, Coco and Bandit, and a dog named Zuko. Her best friend was Sadie. She'd just moved back in to the yellow, gable-roofed house she shared with Susan in the quiet, leafy suburb of La Crescenta. On sunny days, she loved to lay out in the backyard, listening to music, reading a book, and staring up at the endless blue California sky. She loved tattoos. She dreamed of being a rapper or an actor or maybe a writer. She wanted to travel and learn a new language, and she thought she had all the time in the world to do so. But she didn't. Because that CCTV footage of her walking away from Divine's house at 6 a.m, that was the last confirmed sighting of Elaine Park. Since that day, she's never been seen or heard from again.
I need some answers. I need some closure. Then Divine is cleared, I'm cleared, and we found Elaine, and she could either start a new life or I could bury her properly if she's no longer with us anymore. I just want to find Elaine. That's all I want.
People often ask me if Susan still thinks Elaine is alive. Honestly, it's a tough question to answer, because I think that changes from day to day. Some days, she seems certain Elaine is gone. She'll refer to the need to find her body so that she could be put to rest. It's almost like she's made peace with that reality. And then there are the days when she lets herself wonder, what if? If she were still alive, where would she be now? Would she have met someone, gotten married, maybe even had kids of her own? On other days, where she can't bear to believe that Elaine is no longer here, but can't bring herself to believe that she could be living happily somewhere else either, she sits in a space she sees as a kind of middle ground. Maybe she is alive, but she's stuck somewhere terrible. somewhere none of us would ever want one of our loved ones to be. It's a horrible thought, but at the same time, it provides a level of hope that isn't marred with undue optimism, but also isn't complete devastation. Which of those days it'll be depends on what's happening around her. Every now and then, tips still come in. Someone claims they saw Elaine. And when that happens, even just for a moment, that hope flickers back to life. It's like this endless emotional roller coaster. 1 minute, everything's lost, and then suddenly, there's a sighting. Someone swears they saw her at a convenience store in Long Beach, or walking out of a strip club in Hollywood, or getting on a bus in Austin. And not just maybe Elaine, definitely, without a doubt, Elaine. And just like that, Susan's pulled back in. The ride climbs higher and higher, filling her with that rush of what if, until reality comes crashing back down, and she's right back where she started. The truth is, Elaine's been gone for 8 years now. In all that time, no one has actually seen her. Not one person, as far as I can tell. She's not out there somewhere, living a new life, driving a Range Rover with 2 kids, a golden retriever, and a house with a white picket fence. That future was stolen from her. Because, in all likelihood, Elaine Park is dead. Deep down, I think Susan knows that. But when you're the parent of a missing child, how do you face that kind of truth? Because that truth is unbearable.
The worst part is not knowing what happened to her. And thousands of people are invested, looking for her, searching for her. If we find her, at least, like I said, if she's still alive and if she's going through some sort of drug addiction, I could put her in rehabilitation and, help her straighten her life. It doesn't matter. All we want is anything could be fixed. I will help her with all my life, all my blood, last blood I have. I will help her.
You might have heard Elaine's story before. Back in January 2017, when she first disappeared, her face was everywhere. Newspapers, TV, social media. And when her car was found abandoned a few days later, Glendale Police Department upgraded her case from voluntary missing to critical missing, basically validating that this wasn't just someone running away to clear their head, that something far more sinister was at play. And when they did, her case exploded.
The missing woman's car was found parked along PCH right behind us here. Earlier tonight, search crews were scouring the beach down below with flashlights, looking for any clues as to where this missing woman could be. I'm also told investigators then pinged her phone and knew it was in this general area here in Malibu.
If you didn't hear about Elaine's case back then, maybe you know it from To Live and Die in LA, the podcast hosted by Neil Strauss. In Season 2, Neil and his team, his partner Ingrid, his friend Mike Eisinger, Mike's wife Anne-Marie, private investigator Jaden Brandt, and Rosemary Wheeler, a friend of Elaine's mum Susan, took a deep dive into the case. Neil was a journalist for Rolling Stone, a best-selling author, and a ghostwriter for some of Hollywood's biggest names. And his team was just as impressive. Ingrid's a model, Mike is the guitarist for Incubus, Anne-Marie is a world-renowned violinist, Jaden has worked on many major criminal cases, and Rosemary's daughter danced with Elaine in the same trip. They looked at a whole lot of different angles: suicide, abduction, even cold-blooded murder. In the end, they seemed to have settled on the latter, and their theory was almost too shocking to believe: that the person responsible for Elaine's disappearance was her own mother, Susan Park. They laid out their evidence, and by the time the podcast wrapped, hundreds of thousands of listeners were convinced. And honestly, as I listened, I found myself believing it too, because, let's be real, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? But the reality with Elaine's case is there's smoke everywhere you look. The truth isn't black and white. I've spent more than 3 years investigating Elaine's disappearance, deep diving into her social media data and DMs, analysing verbal and written statements with criminal profiling tools, poring over old bank transactions and phone records, watching and digesting hours of video footage, combing through laptop and iCloud data, and, maybe most importantly, spending countless hours talking to Susan. And after all of that, right now, there's only one thing I can say for sure. There's so much more to Elaine's story. You might think you know what happened to Elaine, who was involved, and how it all played out. But trust me, you've barely scratched the surface. There's a lot that hasn't been said here. There are people in this case you've never even heard of. Someone out there knows exactly what happened to Elaine. There are a lot of stones here that have been left unturned. Until now. Because I'm here to flip them on their heads. I'm Troy Taylor, and this is Among the Missing. It's late 2022. Elaine's been missing for 5 years now. She never got to celebrate her 21st birthday, or her 22nd, or her 23rd, 24th, 25th, or 26th. Every year, the people who love her gather on the anniversary of her disappearance, hold vigils, and pray that this will be the year they finally get answers. But with every passing year, that hope dims a little more. In those 5 years, life has moved on. Elaine's family has relocated. Her cats have passed away. Her friends have graduated, found partners, got married, and had kids. But Elaine? She hasn't moved forward at all. She's stuck in this kind of vortex, this strange space where a lot of missing people seem to end up. Frozen in time, trapped in the memory of who they were, what they looked like, and even what they were wearing when they vanished. Friends and family still hold on to hope that they'll turn up alive. But the reality is, nothing changes. Maybe that's why, when someone goes missing, people come crawling out of the woodwork. Some genuinely want to help. They see a family in pain, lost, desperate for answers, and they do whatever they can to support them. Others, they're in it for the wrong reasons. Some want to make a quick buck, whether that's by trying to claim a reward, blackmailing a grieving family, or straight up faking a ransom. Others flood the case with false tips, maybe for attention, maybe just to stir up chaos. And then there are the ones who don't seem to have any motive at all. The ones who just seem to want to cause more pain and suffering. I learned pretty quickly, investigating Elaine's case, that you hope the person you're talking to is in that first group. But you have to expect they're going to be in the second, because most of the time, they are.
Hey Susan, how are you? I'm here, can you hear me? Oh, hang on, let me try and put my headphones in. Oh, the microphone's on mute.
It's a quiet Thursday morning, and I'm on my 5th cup of coffee for the day, when Susan Park, Elaine's mum, calls. She's just gotten off the phone with someone claiming to be a private investigator, and she's super hyped about what he had to say. Let's call the guy Jim. Jim had reached out to Susan earlier that morning with an offer. He had an opening in his busy missing persons schedule, and for a fixed price of $3,500, he said he'd take on Elaine's case. No extra costs, no additional expenses, no other cases. And he wouldn't stop until he found her. There was just one catch. She had to pay the full $3,500 immediately. Otherwise, the deal was off. Susan was beaming. A PI willing to work for a flat rate and exhaust every possible avenue of every possible lead until he found her daughter? To a desperate mother, that's a dream come true. And it became clear as we spoke that she had her finger hovering over the Pay Now button, but just wanted to get my thoughts before she clicked send. It's always hard to have these conversations, because here's someone in front of you, carrying this huge balloon of hope, and you have to be the person who puts a pin in it and says, hey, this doesn't seem right to me. But at the same time, you can't just sit there and watch these things happen time and time again. So I tried to let her down gently. The truth was, like most things in life, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. But hey, let's check it out. just in case I've got it all wrong. So we teed up a call. You might be wondering why Susan called me in the first place. In short, that's just how things worked back then. If a call needed to be made, that was my job. If a Freedom of Information Act request needed to be filed, that was also my job. Calling convenience stores and bars and restaurants to request CCTV footage, that was also me. But dealing with a pushy PI who might just be another scammer looking to exploit a grieving mother, that was new. At the beginning, the call was innocuous enough. We discussed the primary theories that were already out there around the case, and while he was dubious, he invited me to table my thoughts.
And Susan knows that she and I have a difference of opinion to some degree on the boyfriend. I personally don't see anything that I've seen that leans toward him, other than that, obviously she was last seen at his house. The footage cuts off and he hasn't been very helpful. But at the same time, I can understand why. I mean, they're in the public eye. Their lawyers would have been, from day one, telling them don't say a word to anyone, don't get involved, stay out of it. There's a lot of drugs involved, and I think that would have obviously reflected badly on them and their reputation. So I can understand why they're doing that. I think it's I think it's horrible putting that ahead of a missing person.
But as the call progressed and Jim slowly started pushing the conversation toward his fee, things started getting a little more tense. Every time I asked a question, I could feel his frustration build. He'd brush me off, redirect to Susan, and push harder. I just couldn't get my head around his pitch. $3,500, expenses included, with a no-end date arrangement for him to find Elaine, with exclusive use of his time. It just boggled my mind that anyone would buy into that.
I worry. I mean, I wonder if in terms of the costs, if that's how that is going to cover all your expenses. Though, I mean, you're based on the East Coast, right? So you'll have flights and a comm, or obviously there's an element of wanting to verify these things with people before moving down the path. I mean, Susan's got hundreds of tips from, as you said, psychics, and had private eyes that contact her. She's had heaps of people contact her that want to assist, but you've got to try and pick out the people that are genuine, and so I guess that's the intent of this call.
He diverted back to Susan pretty much the second I stopped talking, with the same message: buy now or miss out forever. In the meantime, I was typing madly away, digging into Jim's background. And within minutes, I had my answer about Jim's character. A background check and a copy of his criminal record. Turned out, Jim had been a bad boy, copping a number of traffic violations. No seatbelt, failure to stop, driving without insurance. That kind of thing. Oh, and I almost forgot. Felony grand theft and felony scheme to defraud. Who would have guessed? I was so focused on diving into Jim's sketchy past, I almost missed the most pointed question I think I've ever heard anyone ask Susan directly. Did you kill Elaine? My jaw didn't just hit the floor, it fell through it. And for the first time, I heard Susan cry. Susan's a tough woman. She's Korean, and if you know anything about Korean culture, you know that showing emotion, especially in public, is rare. But this cracked something in her. She answered him directly, through snuffled cries. No, I did not. I have no idea what happened to her or where she is. I just want to find her. Jim barely acknowledged her response. He just jumped right back into his sales pitch, like he was selling a set of steak knives on an infomercial at 3 a.m. Now's the time to decide. Are we locking this thing in? I can send a Cash App request right now. No need for a contract. I've got other people busting down my door, but I just wanted to give you the first chance. I let it go on for as long as I could stand, before finally cutting in. I asked him straight up, who have you done this for before? Where is your business based? And when can you get started in LA? And that's when he admitted, technically he couldn't actually work in LA, because he wasn't licensed in California. But he could use on-the-ground PI resources to assist him, which, by the way, was also included in the fixed $3,500 fee. I pressed on again about how he could possibly cover all of his expenses for that flat fee. And finally, he snapped. He threw what I would call a pretty epic tantrum, told Susan I'd ruined her chances of finding Elaine, and before slamming the phone down, hit me with a question I'd been asking myself my entire life. Who the fuck are you? And honestly, that's a fair question. I tied things up with Susan, trying to reassure her that it was okay that she cried, and that anybody with a missing child would have done exactly the same thing in the same situation.
No, of course. Of course you did. Of course you... I mean, it's difficult, you know. They're hard questions to ask, and he's very direct. Doesn't make it easy. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
This episode is brought to you by Pluto TV. Are you looking for your next case? Pluto TV has all your favorite crime dramas streaming for free, which means suspicion is free, with countless cases to crack. Watch CSI, Criminal Minds, NCIS, Blue Bloods, Tracker, FBI, and SWAT, all for free from all your favorite devices. Feel the free. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
Who the fuck am I? Well, I can tell you who I'm not. I'm not a journalist for Rolling Stone. I haven't written a single New York Times bestseller, let alone 10. I haven't ghostwritten celebrity biographies. I'm not a rock star or a world-renowned violinist. I'm definitely not a private investigator. And I never met Elaine Park. I'm just a guy who listened to a podcast and somehow ended up in the investigation, digging through timelines, cross-referencing data, piecing together every tiny clue to try to help find a missing girl on the other side of the world. So how did I get involved in this case? Well, I guess you could say it kind of fell out of the sky, or, more accurately perhaps, the gas tank. I was listening to the To Live and Die in LA podcast and engaging on the podcast's Facebook group when something jumped out at me. So much of the theory that Susan was involved in Elaine's disappearance revolved around her car. Did Elaine make it home that morning, or did she drive straight to the spot on the Pacific Coast Highway where her car was found? Or did she go somewhere else, and then someone ditched her car on the PCH? To me, it seemed simple to find the answer to those questions. If we could check her bank records to see where and when she last filled up her gas tank, and then cross-reference that with her Honda Civic's fuel economy, we could estimate how far she'd travelled before she disappeared. From there, it was just a matter of compiling that data with every location she was known to have visited in those last few days. Simple, right? Okay, maybe not so much. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. For those of you who don't already know the details of Elaine's case, a timeline of the days leading up to her disappearance would probably help. We'll break this down in much more detail in future episodes, but for now, here's the short version.
Thursday, January 26, 2017, 2 days before Elaine disappears.
At 3:42 a.m., Elaine calls Susan, telling her car has broken down on the bridge where the 210 and 118 freeways merge. At 3:48 a.m., she texts Susan, "Come with a gallon of gas, please, lol." At 3:49 a.m., Susan replies, "Okay, stay safe." At 3:55 a.m., Elaine texts again, "How far are you?" Susan reassures her she's on her way and tells her to stay inside the car. Elaine responds, "Faster the better." Susan replies, "You cannot afford to have a cop see you," and we'll come back to why that matters later. A few minutes later, Susan and her boyfriend Jeff arrive. According to Susan and Jeff, not only had Elaine run out of gas, but her battery had also died. They refueled her car, Jeff gives her a jump start, and Elaine heads straight to a gas station on Foothill Boulevard, near her house, where she fills her tank. At 4:42 a.m., Elaine arrives home. At approximately 10 a.m., Jeff and Susan get home and find Elaine in the living room, wearing lingerie. At 11:09 a.m., Susan texts Elaine, making a BLT. Want one? Which, at the very least, confirms that Elaine was home at this time. At 5 p.m., Susan texts Elaine about a job opening at a nearby restaurant. Elaine doesn't reply. And maybe the most important detail of this day, this is also the day that Elaine's previous ex-boyfriend, Lolo, was released from police custody in Venice Beach. Elaine was expected to testify at an upcoming trial of his after he was indicted for possession of an unlicensed firearm and possession of weed while they were together. But we'll talk more about Lolo in a future episode. There's one more thing that happened that day, something I found a little odd, but I can't really put my finger on why. From around 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., Elaine and her best friend Sadie keep trying to get in touch with each other. They're both texting and calling, but for some reason, none of their messages seem to go through. Elaine never calls Sadie back, and they don't appear to actually have gotten in touch with each other that night.
Friday, January 27, 2017. The day before Elaine disappears.
11:44 a.m. Divine calls Elaine. They talk for 5 minutes and arrange to meet up at around 2 p.m. This is interesting because, from all the records I've gone through, Elaine and Divine hadn't spoken since January 20, when she broke up with him. He'd begged her to reconsider, saying, "Whatever you're going through, we can work through it together." Divine had just returned from a trip to Utah for the Sundance Film Festival. The dates check out. The festival ran from January 19 to January 27, so it's fair to assume this is accurate. At 1:13 p.m, Divine texts Elaine. Only reason why I said this is because I have to go to LA anyway, so it makes more sense that way for you to come and get me now if you can. She doesn't reply. At around 1:18 p.m, Elaine texts Susan, asking for $20 with a commitment to pay it back before 6 p.m. Susan quick pays the cash to her immediately. Right after this, Elaine fills up her gas tank from empty. This is important because it gives us a timestamp for the last time her car was fueled, before she vanished. At 1:20 p.m, Elaine calls her dad, Ray, and asks for money. He tells her to come by his office and he'll give her some. At 1:26 p.m, Elaine texts Divine, "On my way." But she's not on her way, because at 2:52 p.m, Divine texts her, "I'm sitting here waiting for you, where are you?" Again, she doesn't reply. Around an hour later, Elaine receives a message from her friend Sadie, asking if she'd left her curler at Elaine's house. At 4 p.m, Elaine calls Divine, and they talk for a few minutes. 4:24 p.m, Divine calls her back. Their back and forth all day centers around Elaine saying she's coming to meet him, but never actually showing up. And again, she's not on her way, because at 4:43 p.m, Elaine texts Ray, her dad, letting him know she's on her way to his office, and at 5:05 p.m, she texts to let him know she's arrived. They meet up at Ray's office, and Ray gives her $50 in cash. At 5:38 p.m, Elaine texts Sadie, saying she'll be back at her house in an hour. Sadie replies, asking Elaine what she's doing for the night, but Elaine doesn't respond. At 6:01 p.m, Susan texts Elaine a series of question marks, reminding her that she'd committed to pay the $20 she borrowed back by 6 p.m. At 6:18 p.m, Elaine texts Divine to let him know she's finally on her way. But, again, she's not. She blames traffic, and he tells her to drive safe. About half an hour later, Elaine messages Sadie to tell her she's almost back at her house, which, by the way, is a good hour to an hour and a half away from Divine's house in Calabasas on a busy Friday night. Sadie replies saying she'll be right over, and at around 7 p.m, Sadie arrives to pick up her curling iron and a bracelet she'd left there. At 7:07 p.m, when Elaine wasn't home yet, Sadie calls her. Elaine sounds agitated and says she's 1 minute away. Shortly after, Elaine pulls up, races inside, grabs the curler and the bracelet, hands them over without much conversation, and then immediately leaves again, without carrying anything else in her arms. At 7:36 p.m, Susan texts Elaine again about the $20. "Hello, QP, $20, now." At 7:56 p.m, when Elaine still is not at his house, Divine texts Elaine again, "Where are you?" At 8:09 p.m, Elaine eventually replies, again blaming traffic. At 8:37 p.m, CCTV footage finally captures Elaine's car entering Divine's gated community, 6.5 hours later than they had originally planned to meet. At 8:38 p.m, Elaine parks in front of Divine's house. It takes her exactly 15 seconds to get from the gate of the compound to the end of the cul-de-sac where Divine's house is located. At 8:39 p.m, Elaine's car lights flash twice as she gets out of her car and walks to the Compere property. At 8:43 p.m, Susan calls Elaine. No answer. At 8:44 p.m, Susan texts Elaine, "Hello, QP, $20, now. Answer, now." 9:04 p.m, Elaine finally replies, "Yeah, sorry, give me till later tonight." This tells us one of two things. Either she didn't plan to stay the night at Divine's, or she knew she couldn't pay Susan back that night. Her bank balance was negative $26, so the only way she could have paid her back was with the $50 cash her dad had given her. At 9:06 p.m, Susan replies, "Keep your word, you said 6 p.m, followed by 11 exclamation marks. According to the To Live and Die in LA podcast, Episode 9, Contradictions and Coincidences, at 9:54 p.m, Susan goes online to check the State Department website's passport application page. At 10:18 p.m, car headlights appear to enter the gated community in which Divine's residence is located. They're visible for a few seconds before the headlights appear to be switched off. At 10:19 p.m, Elaine exits Divine's guest house. Her car lights flash 4 times in a row, and then, out of nowhere, a car enters the CCTV footage from the right. It circles around the cul-de-sac where Divine's house is, past Elaine, and exits the CCTV footage. 30 seconds later, a car is seen exiting the gated community, passing another car, which happens to be an Uber on its way to pick up Elaine and Divine to go to the movies in Woodland Hills. At 10:20 p.m, the Uber stops outside Divine's house, and Elaine goes back inside to get Divine. They emerge less than a minute later, get into the Uber, and exit the gated community. Elaine and Divine get dropped off at the AMC and catch the 10:45 p.m. showing of XXX, The Return of Xander Cage, which takes us into
Saturday, January 28, 2017. The day Elaine disappears.
Another Uber picks Elaine and Divine up from the movie theatre and drops them back at Divine's house at 1:10 a.m. There's not much recorded activity after they enter Divine's house, but at 3:20 a.m, Elaine checks Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. According to Susan, Jeff, and Daisy, another of Elaine's friends, Divine initially tells them that Elaine woke up at 4 a.m, started singing and swaying, got dressed really fast, and then pretty much left. Later, he corrects himself, telling them that she left at 6 a.m, not 4 a.m. And it wasn't that she pretty much left, but that's exactly what she did. She left. Susan and Jeff also say that Divine originally told them that Elaine had actually gone back inside after initially leaving because she'd left her keys behind. But the CCTV footage that's been supplied does not reflect this. The footage shows Elaine walking out of Divine's property at 6:04 a.m. and heading toward her car. At 6:05 a.m, her car lights flash 3 times, and just before Elaine reaches her car, the CCTV footage cuts off at exactly 6:05 a.m. to the dot. It's worth noting here that in all other videos, we see every car both coming and going from the property, right through until they exit the gate. At 6:07 a.m, Elaine's car is seen passing a neighbour's property, and, on a number plate reader camera at the gate, is seen exiting the gated community. Elaine's car isn't seen again until February 2, when it's found abandoned on the Pacific Coast Highway, near the Coral Canyon Road intersection between the 76 station and the Malibu RV park. Elaine, herself, has never been seen again. There's a lot more to dig into on the timeline, particularly what happened between the morning of January 28 and the discovery of her car on February 2, but we'll get to that in future episodes. Because, as you'll see, in Elaine's case, the devil is very much in the detail. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to add about the CCTV footage. The footage on the Compere CCTV camera is, according to them, exactly 3 hours out of whack, showing 3 hours later than it actually is. Also, just to make things even more confusing, the gate cam license plate footage, according to the To Live and Die in LA podcast, is exactly 1 hour and 7 minutes out of whack, showing 7:14 a.m. as the time Elaine's car exits the gate, not 6:07 a.m. How it can be off by 1 hour and 7 minutes is anyone's guess. The other thing I wanted to do, aside from laying out the basic timeline, is to give you an outline of who the key persons in Elaine's story are, at least for the time being. We already know about Elaine, her mum Susan, her dad Ray, her ex-boyfriend Divine, and her best friend Sadie. But there are a few more names you need to remember. There's Jeff, Susan's boyfriend. He was with Susan for most of the time around the time Elaine disappeared, and they're still together today. Then there's Travis, Jeff's son, and Elaine's kind of stepbrother. There's Daisy, another friend of Elaine's. She claims they weren't speaking at the time Elaine disappeared, but there's evidence to suggest that maybe that's not quite right. There's Lolo, Elaine's previous ex-boyfriend, who was the one who was released from police custody the day before she disappeared. Then there's Bubba, Elaine's tattoo artist, and a damn good one at that. Nick and Cody, 2 other friends Elaine was hanging out with a lot before she disappeared. And then there's Stoney Baloney, but we'll come back to him soon. Before we go any further, let's go back to the thing that pulled me into this case in the first place, the gas analysis. If you remember before we broke down the timeline, I mentioned that one of the biggest theories about Elaine's disappearance centered around her car, Specifically, whether she could have made it back to her house in Glendale before ending up on the PCH, with that half a tank of gas left in it when the car was found. So I set out to figure it out. I tracked down the exact make and model of Elaine's car and found its miles per gallon breakdown for highway and street driving. Then, I factored in what I knew about Elaine's driving habits. From what I could tell, Elaine liked to drive fast. Remember when I said Elaine took 15 seconds to get from the gated entrance to Divine's house? Well, it took both the Uber drivers and the mystery car 30 seconds to cover that same distance. But that wasn't enough. I needed to know exactly how much gas she'd had when she last filled up. So I called 76's corporate office and asked them if they could tell me the price per gallon on the day Elaine last got gas. And, surprisingly, they could. With that, I calculated exactly how many gallons Elaine's car had when she left the gas station, and then I plugged everything into an algorithm. What I found stopped me in my tracks. There were 200 miles of unaccounted for usage on Elaine's car between her last fill-up and when it was found on the PCH. Not 20 miles, not 50 miles, not even 100 miles. 200 miles. At that point I figured there was no way to move forward. Maybe I'd hit a dead end. That is, until I saw Rosemary Wheeler's name pop up on the To Live and Die in LA Facebook group. Rosemary had worked closely with Susan on Elaine's case, and if anyone had the information I needed to fill the gaps, it was her. So I took my shot. I asked publicly for any data that might help, and to my surprise, Rosemary replied with exactly what I was looking for. I plugged her data into my analysis and came to a new conclusion. It was not possible for Elaine's car to have made it back home to Lacra Center and then onto the PCH with half a tank of gas left. I thought I had just discovered a major flaw in the theory that Susan was involved. So, like any true crime-obsessed person would, I posted my analysis on the Facebook discussion group. And the reaction? Explosive. A lot of people were pissed off. They poked holes in my logic, arguing that my analysis was flawed, that it had to be Susan, that I was wrong. And, to be fair, they were right. Because after running the numbers again, and with yet again more information about where she'd travelled in the days leading up to her disappearance, plus discovering she'd filled her tank twice, it turned out it was possible for Elaine's car to have made it home, and then to the PCH with half a tank left. There were still some missing miles, but instead of 200, we're now just looking at 40 miles. But we'll come back to that in a later episode. Because while all of this was happening, something else was going on behind the scenes. About 2 hours after I posted my final gas analysis, I logged into Facebook Messenger and saw 2 new message requests. One was from Rosemary Wheeler, and the other was from Susan Park. And that's when it all changed. From that moment on, my casual curiosity turned into a full-blown obsession. For the next 3 years, I spent 8 to 10 hours a day, every day, investigating Elaine's disappearance. I worked with both Susan and Rosemary, independently, gathering every possible piece of information I could. I kept an open mind. I refused to jump to conclusions. And eventually, I built out a timeline with over 7,000 data points, cross-referencing everything from text messages and phone calls, to Snapchat locations, to IP addresses, bank records, Instagram and Twitter DMs, CCTV footage, and first-hand witness statements. And then somewhere in the middle of all that research, I found myself scrolling through every single post, comment, and like on the Help Find Elaine Park Facebook page, the page Susan and Rosemary had set up after Elaine had disappeared. At first, nothing jumped out. Just the usual mix of look at the boyfriend and thoughts and prayers comments. The occasional, I'm a psychic, I know where she is, call me immediately post. But then I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. About a week or 2 after Elaine went missing, dozens of disturbing comments started popping up. At that stage, people probably assumed it was just some troll. But when I looked closer, it was clear this wasn't just some random guy being an idiot online. All of the comments came from the same fake profile, Stony Baloney. Here's a sample of what he wrote. She's pretty. No wonder she got abducted. She probably ran away to start a new life, far, far away. I hope someone does come after me, and if I come out alive, I would laugh, just like I'm laughing at you. And if I'm hiding anything, it's my dick in my hand as I scroll through Elaine's missing page, looking at her pics. Mommy, help. Compassion is for the weak, just like Elaine was. She looks familiar to me. I might have seen her at a junkie pad a few times, a few years ago. But like I said, I don't know. Someone then replies and says, she's not the type of girl you'd find shooting up by the LA River somewhere. And Baloney says, yeah, I didn't take her for a whore either. Please post autopsy pics when they come out. Pretty please. She's dead, and those fools are hiding the body. Die, bitch, die. I'm what you call evil. He then posted audio of one of the victims in the Toolbox murders case. Shaken, and feeling like I'd stumbled onto something possibly important, something I'd never seen or heard anyone else talk about, I clicked into Baloney's profile. And what I found was even worse than the comments he'd posted. His entire page was filled with horrific, graphic images, things I won't even describe here. I deep dived into his account, again going through every comment, every like, canvassing the entirety of his info page. And then I noticed he'd left his friend list open. I downloaded it, analysed it, and eventually, using everything I'd scraped off his page, figured out exactly who was behind the account. Taylor Campos. I jumped on over to his personal Facebook page, scoured through all of the posts and comments and likes, and noticed that he had also left his friends list open on this account too. We'll come back to Taylor because, while he's important and he shares more than one connection with Elaine, something even more concerning popped up as I was running through his friends list. Something I almost scrolled right past. When I saw what it was, my jaw dropped through the floor again, for the second time of what would end up being many, many times during the course of my investigation. I think I must have sat there for at least 10 minutes in complete shock, staring at my screen, my heart almost beating out of my chest. I'd found something big. I recognized the face of one of Taylor's friends. Recognized it very clearly because I'd been looking at it only a few hours earlier, when I'd been running through all of Elaine's friends and family. This guy, the one spewing the most disgusting comments about Elaine, calling her a junkie and a whore who deserved to die, telling the world she was dead and her body was hidden somewhere no one would ever find it. He was friends with Elaine's stepbrother, Travis. But that's next time on Among the Missing. We've still got a whole lot of road to travel here. There's a ton of information we'll go through over the coming episodes. Things shift and change as we follow my investigation through, and we uncover some seriously critical new evidence. So, for now, try not to draw any firm conclusions. But in the meantime, Elaine still hasn't been found. Her body's still out there, somewhere, in the darkness, waiting. Waiting to be reunited with her loved ones. Waiting to properly be laid to rest. Waiting for justice. If you know anything about what happened to Elaine, or where she is now, a reward fund of $25,000 cash is still on offer. If you'd like more information on the reward, or have any information relating to Elaine's disappearance, please email us at amongthemissingpodcast@gmail.com, or text or leave us a voicemail at 424-235-1618. And I've got a message for a very specific person. I know you're lurking here. I know you always have been, making sure everything's still okay. But I'm here to tell you it's not. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. I won't stop until the world finds out what you did. And they will, because the truth always finds its way home. Thanks for listening to Among the Missing. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Among the Missing Podcast. If you're looking for more of Among the Missing, jump on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/amongthemissing, where we host ongoing discussion forums and release a weekly pack of case notes, breaking down and expanding upon the evidence presented in each episode. Who knows, maybe you'll spot something I didn't. We're also going to be dropping a weekly Q&A episode on our subscription channels starting next week. So if you've got any burning questions to be included in this, drop us a line at either amongthemissingpodcast@gmail.com or text or leave us a voicemail message at 235 1618. Finally, I want to throw out a special thanks to a few important people relevant to the investigation into Elaine's disappearance: Dux, Falcon, and Monstera. They know who they are and what they did. I hope you know you made a difference, and, more than anything, I hope you never stop dancing. Among the Missing is a production of FTM Media, produced by Troy Taylor, Mark Tarulli, and Fred Schertzer, written by Troy Taylor. Our theme song is Lucid Symphony by Dirty Freaks.